Hey friends, and welcome to this week's episode of the U-Turn Podcast. This is your host, Ashley Stahl. I'm a counterterrorism professional turned career coach, speaker, and Forbes blogger, and I created the U-Turn Podcast because, let's face it, every now and again we realize that we're living life on autopilot and it's time to wake up and make that U-turn in your life. So prepare to go deep with some of the most transformational people I know, here to help you grow and upgrade your mindset, whether it's in work or love. In the meantime, we've opened up access to 3 free e-courses on uturnpodcast.com. So head on over there if you want to land a new job you love, find your purpose, or launch your dream business. All of these courses are totally free. All you got to do is head on over to uturnpodcast.com. That's YOUTURN podcast.com. Now let's get started with this week's guest.
One of my clients come here to my office here in Vancouver, and I'll ask them to take a deep breath. And I'll ask them first if they are able to take a deep breath, and they'll say yes, of course. And then I'll ask them to do it, and most people can't execute it. It's from the upper chest. But when you are able to take a breath from a really low, deep place, what happens is that the brain cannot do 2 things at once. It can't be in fight and flight or in a relaxed state. And when you're taking these deep breaths, it causes you to be in a relaxed state.
Hey U-Turners, it's Ash here, and I'm so excited for today's guest. It's Janice Tomich, and she is an expert on communication, public speaking, everything from how to deliver an incredible speech or presentation if you're at work, all the way down to the mindset of it and how to release the fears and the blocks that keep you from really stepping into it. I don't know if it's true, but I keep reading about that whole statistic that people hold the fear of public speaking very close to the fear of dying. So God knows, I hope I can help you guys today with her. And Janice, thank you so much for coming on to talk about how to create an effective presentation.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I'm so excited to be here, Ashley.
Yeah, I feel like I've got a stake in the game because as a public speaker, I'm always looking to learn how to do a better job, because these skills, for anybody listening, if they're in the workforce, it's necessary to be able to talk to your clients or your boss or whatever. And then it's also, for me, necessary to get on stage and do a good job. So this is a very meaningful topic.
Yes, I agree with you. Absolutely a very meaningful topic. And what happens by way of, and as you probably have found the results of being on those stages, the impact that it's had, for you, for your career. And that's the thing that I notice with my clients as well.
Yeah, definitely. And just kind of getting started, I'm curious to learn what inspired you to be on this path of helping so many CEOs, entrepreneurs, and, corporate professionals nail communication and public speaking. What pulled you to it?
No, I think it's just like everybody else. I had a huge, huge fear of public speaking myself, so much so that it held me back in my career. But push came to shove, and I kind of, in a way, I was forced to. I had to retire from one career, and so I took myself back to university, and that's where I acquired my communication degree, and I acquired a marketing degree. And I knew that things had changed a little bit since I had been in university or had been in academia previously to that, and that it looked different, that there was a lot more project work and that there was a lot more presentations that would be required, within my program. And so I was bound and determined that I was going to get better at it, and not to say that there wasn't a lot of lumps along the way, but I did get better at it and became a student of it. And from my learning, I wanted to help other people get more comfortable with it and be able to communicate better from podiums or from stages, whatever that looked like.
And as we're kind of looking at effective presentation skills, I know we could probably do a whole episode for sure on the mindset of speaking. What are a couple gems you could offer anybody listening right now as we get into these steps to actually craft a strong presentation for whatever purpose? What are some mindset insights you might have for them to just kind of consider as they listen to you?
What I would ask your audience to consider is take a step back and think about the presentations that you have had the opportunity to watch, and from a discerning eye, the ones that really engaged you and you felt very, very compelled, and those that didn't. And, what was that gap in between that happened? And one thing in my observation in the work that I've been doing now for the past 10 years, it's sometimes you'll watch a speaker and it's though they're holding a little bit of a mask, between them and the audience. Mm-hmm. So there's a barrier there that they're not quite comfortable, in the seat of themselves. And then the other thing, and it's a bit of a mask, a barrier in a way too. It's an over performance piece, mm-hmm. So it's almost like they're acting, and so they're no longer, they're not being, their authentic self. Mm-hmm. And from a mindset piece for an individual, that's a big leap to be able to be in that place of comfortable, being comfortable and being competent.
I feel like that's probably my biggest block is I practice so much more than people would ever know, when I give a talk. Mm-hmm. And sometimes mm-hmm. I feel silly because I think being a really good speaker sometimes feels like being an actor. And a lot of people don't know that. I have a lot of friends who tell me, I'm going to free flow and I'm going to say a little prayer and get up there. And to me, I just think to myself, oh my gosh, like people don't pay $2,000 a ticket for Hamilton hoping that the actors do the same thing the next night, that's what, to me, being an excellent speaker, you've got to really practice and know what you're going to say and really have spent that time prior. So how do you kind of navigate that line between over preparing and trusting yourself?
Mm-hmm. So the client, when I work with clients, it looks a little bit different than most people on their own would practice. And it's obvious too when you see people that practice in this mode where they've memorized word for word for word, because then it's that it looks a little bit over polished, and again we get to that over performance sort of aspect of it where it doesn't look genuine. And then oftentimes what happens when someone memorizes an entire presentation like that, they'll get to one word and they'll forget it and they'll be like a deer in headlights. Mm. So how I have my clients practice is, yes, oftentimes, they will construct an entire speech and word for word, but then I will have them go back and I will have them pull out just the key points from that speech, from that presentation, and practice then from those. And so, you talked about free flow, and it is kind of sort of, like free flow, but you've got your stable structure, there, you've got the form of your presentation there, and then you are expanding, riffing off of those key points. So every time, you practice, and when you get on stage, it may sound a little bit different, but more natural and more conversational.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And, for anybody listening, I know you talked about the first step of creating an effective presentation is your intention. And I love this because sometimes we think about what we want to say, but we don't think about why we're giving the speech or what's behind it. So what insight do you have for anybody who's kind of sitting with this first step of intention?
Yes, to put a big sticky on top of their computer, if that's where they're creating their presentation from, or if they're working on a whiteboard or whatever, intention sits on the top. And it's always the litmus test to keep going back through as you create your presentation to make sure that you are hitting your intention. And so intention, I look at it coming from two ways. By way of you, a presenter, delivering a presentation, what do you want to have happen by way of giving the presentation? What would you like to see the outcome to be? And the other intention piece is it's audience, right? So, for all of us, anybody in communications, we realize, that it's not so much about us. Of course, we have a message and we have things that we want to share when we want to influence people, but it's the receiver, it's about the audience and how can they best receive, the information that we would like to share with them.
And I guess everybody has a different goal. It's like, maybe the intention is, if you're a business owner, to get clients, whereas in the workforce, it's to make your client happy or your boss take action of sorts. So this makes a lot of sense to me. And after I found it really interesting, you talked about key message. So after clarifying your intention, it's about looking at what your key message is. And I think this is something as a speaker that I haven't always done, is thought about, what am I really trying to say? I just go straight into content because I've been a content creator for so long. So what can we learn about key message?
So key message is the through line, so, you've hit on this, and, as you were speaking, it's the through line that runs through the entire presentation. And some people get a little bit confused here. So, what's the difference between intention and key message? And a really great analogy around that, I always go back to Steve Jobs. So for me, he was one of the most amazing presenters of all times. And so you think back to when he was, when the MacBook Air, rolled out. And so think back to that. What was his intention? So of course, for, Apple products, and for him, it was to sell, these wonderful little, computers. However, the key message was different. And the key message there was, these wonderful slim computers, laptop computers, that there had never been anything like before that would fit in that gorgeous brown envelope. So that's where the difference between intention and key message lies. Got it. Okay. And let's take somebody like me, since I always like to be my own guinea pig on this podcast. I am an entrepreneur. Speaking is a revenue stream for me, and it's something I love to do. It's something in my mission that I care about. And let's say I really want to up my game, and and I do tend to be lacking a key message sometimes. What are some questions that I should be asking myself or thinking about, and this is for everyone from, the corporate professional preparing for a client presentation to a keynote like me, thinking about writing my next big talk? So, okay. Would you like to be the guinea pig? Do you have a presentation coming up?
I always do. Yeah, I always do.
All right. Share a little bit. Tell me what it looks like.
There's many different ones, but I think one talk I've been wanting to give is about leadership and what does it take to be a powerful leader. And I think the key message that I want to share, or the big mind shift, that's how I see it, as a message, is something you want to shift in the mind. I don't know if that's accurate, but
absolutely. Influence and persuade.
Yeah, I feel like it would be something like, a lot of leaders think that people work for them, but they work for their people. So it's like shifting that mindset.
So do I understand this correctly? Could it be labeled as servant leadership?
Like something about like being of service as a leader. And that's what being leader is. Yeah, I don't like the word servant because of the connotations, but I do like the idea of that for sure.
Of being of service.
Yeah, because a lot of leaders, like a lot of CEOs, have come into my coaching practice at one point or another, and they have issues with their staff. And I'm like, well, they don't work for you. You work for them. Like, why are you missing that?
And they have a hard time wrapping their head around it.
Yeah, like, what are you talking about? I worked my ass off to get here, and now I have a team to support me. Why am I working so hard calling them and doing all this stuff, Yep,
absolutely so. So, moving along, so we talked about that I have a template, that I work my clients through. So, in that vein, if it's leadership of service, can you think of 3 ways that you would support this argument around being of service as a leader?
I would say the first thing is expectations versus agreements. Like, I think a lot of leaders drive by, delegate, and they don't make agreements with people, and they just expect things and kind of put themselves in this victimized role of telling people what to do versus asking people to agree to something that feels good for them.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And what would the second be?
I would say having a professional persona would be something a leader does. Like, I think people who are not leaders in the workforce will they'll leak their desire to be liked, and they'll lead with that versus their desire to make an impact. Being liked is really, I think, it's a great thing. It's a productive thing. It gets work done and it's pleasant. But I think a lot of leaders, or want to be leaders, lead with being liked, and it really damages their ability to execute.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you too. Would better terms around that be trust, perhaps respected?
Yeah, it's like being liked versus being respected, for sure. Mm-hmm. And I think being respected requires a professional persona. And a lot of people have a story in their head that if they, be somebody else at work, they're not being themselves. But my argument is that our whole lives we've been a level of self that comes from our upbringings, and we go into the professional workforce and don't really take that time to decide who we want to be in that regard. Because to me, that's a very authentic choice to choose who you want to be.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and it's interesting, hearing you speak of this, because, I wonder if a lot of people would look at it from the perspective of, being a little bit old school, this button down kind of professional. Yeah. But, and I hear where you're coming from, and I agree with what you're saying. What would the third piece to your argument be?
I haven't thought much about it. It's so formative, but I would probably say something about ego, like no task too big or too small. Like, and also just ego about giving people credit. Like I think it's a trait of toxic leaders when they want credit and they don't want their team to shine because they don't realize they shine when their team shines. So something about that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So you see where we are in the template now. So we've established your three supporting arguments. And the beauty of this template is that it can be used for a long presentation. An hour, could be an hour long, or it could be 5 minutes long. So where the length comes in is below these supporting argument pieces, where you can expand or contract, as much as you would like. So, we can go ahead from there if we want to build out your presentation some more.
Yeah, actually, everybody who's listening, she's kind of walking me through an amazing template she told me about before we started recording. The first is the intention, which we talked about, like, what do you want to happen because of the talk? The second is the message, like, what do you want to say that makes people think differently? And then the third is the three supporting arguments, which is kind of what you just facilitated, which is awesome.
Yes.
And then we kind of backpedal. We look at the opener, which is another topic. And I love that because you can't really figure out it's almost like a book. Like, it's hard to come up with the title until you've come up with the journey,
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So,
yeah.
And I know that often people want to start at that end, right? That they want to create that opening hook.
Yeah.
And you can't, you can't until you've established, the bulk of what you're going to deliver in your presentation. And before we got on the call, I was remarking to you, I watched a TED Talk of yours where you had, it was the phone call that your father received about you being kidnapped. I was sitting on the edge of my seat. I couldn't stop listening because I wanted to hear, how this story unfolded.
Oh, that's so nice. Thank you. It's so funny. Nobody watched that talk for 5 months. And then it went viral this past week. It got 250,000 views out of nowhere. And it was such a lesson for me because the first TED Talk I gave 5 or 6 years ago was the first time I ever got on a stage before. And that one went viral, but I didn't feel expressed in it. I felt like, oh my God, I'm public speaking and I need to write something that feels good. Versus this past talk was like my best I could try to be. Like, I really practiced. I really thought about it. I really tuned into like my life and my career when I gave that talk, and I wrote that talk. And it was so interesting to see the feedback that nobody watched it for 5 months. Like, it was such a lesson for me of sometimes your best work doesn't get seen, and sometimes your mediocre work gets a lot of eyeballs, but like, not to make your work mean it's good or bad when there's not eyeballs on it. And so ironically, all of these, views this past week has been really profound. And I would love your feedback for everybody listening, because I know a lot of you guys on the podcast have watched my stuff, but what's your feedback on the talk where it could have been better or where it was strong, given that we did an opening about my dad and the fake kidnapping incident?
Oh, you grabbed me all along. Can I stop and ask you a question? Though?
Yeah, please.
You've really triggered something for me.
Yeah.
What caused this to turn? Like, what caused it to go viral?
I have no idea.
Do you know?
No
idea. Any idea?
Literally no idea. The day before Thanksgiving, it got like a couple, it was so stagnant. And then I got an inquiry about it and I was like, who's watching this thing? Like, I wish people would watch it. I had no ego about the world watching it. I just felt so creatively expressed in it. I was like, I want the world to connect to this and feel that creative connection to people. And I got this inquiry and I looked it up and it was like a few thousand views out of nowhere. And I was like, that's crazy. Nobody watched it for months and now it got a few thousand views. And then the next day it was like twice that amount. And the next day it was triple that amount. It was like crazy. So I have no explanation, no understanding of what happened.
Interesting. What really hit home for me and is really sticky, and so I watch you, on your website and all the content that you share, where your authority and your credibility comes from. So you're talking about you being a negotiator, and so that piece really sticks for me, and it makes the entire presentation work. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Thank you. That's so helpful. And
you do it consistently, across all platforms. So yeah, it's very evident who you are and where you come from.
And what do you think could have been even stronger? Because to me, I felt quite rehearsed in that talk. And anybody listening, it's the TED Talk I did on how to figure out what you really want. Because I'm sure some people might pause the episode to understand your feedback, using this as a little guinea pig.
I would go back to, what we'd spoken about. You said yourself about the amount of investment and effort that you had in practicing. And I would encourage you the next time that you do a talk to take on what I said, to, pull out your key points and practice that way to see how you feel, if those are comfortable shoes to wear, and, see if you can make it sound perhaps a little bit more conversational, a little bit more natural.
Yeah, definitely. I felt like I was going up there performing, and I went to a speaking workshop and I was like, wow, the best speakers are not just people with content or presence. They're people who know how to improv. And that was the biggest shock for me. Like, I had no idea that it was the best and the highest paid speakers, especially the biggest impact, arguably, they're actors. That's how I feel.
I come from a different perspective than that.
Tell me. I would love a different one, because I don't want to feel like an actor. I don't believe myself to be a good one.
And I've alluded to this, a few times on this call. And to me, the speakers that connect the best with their audience, that there is that real energy of engagement. It's this ability to be yourself, to be up there, to be confident, and to be true to yourself. Whereas to me, when you're acting, that's that barrier, right? That's that little bit of performance, and people can feel it, and an audience can feel it.
Wow.
So there's that real magic there, to being up there and to be able to deliver with confidence and ease. I have actors, that come to me that have to deliver a presentation, they're not, it's not an acting gig, that they've got going on, and they have difficulty with that shift, right? To be themselves, just to be themselves on stage.
Hey U-Turners, so sorry for the quick interruption, but I want to make sure you know that this episode has been brought to you by the Job Offer Academy, our e-course to help you land a new job you love. So if you're sick of applying for jobs and never hearing back, and you'd like to try a free version of our job hunting course, just head on over to youturnpodcast.com/job offer. That's youturnpodcast.com/job offer. Now let's get back to this week's episode. And I know it sounds so silly, to ask, how do you be yourself? But what are some thoughts you have for somebody who is struggling to be themselves on stage,
Yeah, and that's a really big piece of the work that I do, and that's why a lot of clients are recommended, or that come to me. So there's some anxiety around being up there and being yourself, and so I work them through a number of steps. First of all, it's around dialogue and discussion about stories that you're telling yourself that you aren't able to be up there and be your true self. And then the second piece is I work a lot of breath work, with my clients so that they can regulate their emotions.
Yeah.
And also I take them through a lot of visualization exercises so that they are able to be up there and be comfortable as well.
And can you explain breathwork? Because I know one of my closest friends has a breathwork platform, but not everybody knows breathwork. Can you kind of give an idea of what that looks like, or what it really is, or what it does for anybody listening?
Yeah, and this I found so interesting in all the research that I've done over the years. And what essentially what it is the ability to be able to take a deep breath, from a very, low abdominal region. And I find it absolutely so fascinating. I often have clients, one-on-one clients, come here to my office here in Vancouver, and I'll ask them to take a deep breath. And I'll ask them first if they are able to take a deep breath. And they'll say, yes, of course. And then I'll ask them to do it. And most people can't execute it. It's from the upper chest. And, but when you are able to take a breath from a really low, deep place, what happens is that the brain cannot do two things at once. It can't be in fight and flight or in a relaxed state. And when you're taking these deep breaths, it causes you to be in a relaxed state. Yeah. So
I have to admit,
in your shoes.
I don't think I can take a deep breath. And I've had different periods of my career that I have. Right now, I just have a lot of projects going on. So what would you have to say to the me's of the world? Because I think a lot of people right now, and I would invite anybody who's listening now to try and take a deep breath from the bottom of your belly. And it usually will come from your chest. What are some ways to shift that?
So if you find that you cannot do it, that you observe that you are breathing from your upper chest, I would encourage you to lay down on the floor, lay down on the couch, lay down on a bed, and put a very large book on your lower abdomen, and see if you can make it rise and fall, and practice that. Ensure that you can make it rise and fall. You will be able to with some practice, and but while you're doing that, really get attuned to what's being engaged in your lower abdomen for that to be able to happen. And then once you've got that down, again, stand up. And of course, you wouldn't be able to do it with the book anymore. Stand up and really get attuned to what was engaged. And then now try and execute that deep breath from that lower place. And I find with some clients, some of them catch on to it quite quickly. Some it takes a while. It takes a couple of 3 weeks of practice to be able to breathe from that really deep place, because they've been breathing from upper chest, for so long, and that's the default way of breathing.
And isn't it? I don't know. I just can't help but listen to you and think it's kind of sad that we have to practice breathing. Something that's so automatic in the human experience and not necessary for our survival. And I heard, I go to a meditation class almost every day because it's just a couple blocks from my place. And the woman the other day, she said, your quality of life is linked to your quality of breathing. And I just was like, yeah. And she said, your inner reality is reflecting your quality, or your breathing reflects your inner reality, I guess. So I was like, wow, I can't breathe that well. I'm not gasping for air by any means, but when I hear in the class, it's always the worst when she's like, breathe in, deep breath, and everybody's still breathing out, where I finished mine 10 minutes ago. I'm like, my little shallow breath.
I had no air.
Yeah. And it kind of makes me sad. I'm like, why can't I get a big gulp of air? What is going on with me? So I think a lot of people will relate to this. And I know for a lot, it's anxiety. For me, I think there's some stress on my shoulders, which is not my usual flow. Usually I'm a little more easy peasy. I just have a lot of deadlines right now with my book being due. What insight would you have for somebody who is making this shift and practicing? Is there a time frame you think where if they do it every day, they're going to learn to breathe from their belly? Is there an exercise you have for their mindset?
Not an exercise per se around mindset. What I ask my clients to do is put an alarm on their phone. So a couple or 3 times a day, that they check in, how am I breathing? And if I'm not breathing from that deep place, then there you've got the reminder to do a couple of rounds that way. As I said, it takes some practice. So it's, the awareness piece, that I'm not breathing in a way that is the most healthy for me. And so you've got awareness, but then, with that awareness, requires, that practice. That's what it looks like for me.
Yeah, wonderful. And so kind of going into the opener, like I want to give this, leadership talk, for example. What would you recommend? Because I know some people aren't keynoting, they're doing presentations at work. What are some different types of openers? I would love to know, because I know that there's warm openings, cold openings, dramatic opening, how do you choose how to open, and what are some options on the menu here for everybody?
One of the ways that, that I love seeing presentations start. Well, there's a couple of ways. The first that's coming to mind right now is it's that startling statistic, right? Something that someone doesn't know, hasn't heard before. So again, we'll hook them right in to listen. The other one that I absolutely love is which is what you did, what you demonstrated, was this a story piece, right? So you're beginning with a story, and you're reeling your audience in through a story. So it could be a story, or it could be an analogy. And the wonderful thing about that, using the story, is you can then thread it, throughout your whole presentation, and then use it at the end, to finish your presentation off.
And so kind of circling back and buttoning up looping back to what you started with. Okay.
Yep. Tying it all up in a lovely bow.
And when we think about storytelling, I know a lot of people, it's like such a buzz term lately. I've been seeing more storytelling workshops and stuff like that. And I know it's a really powerful marketing tool, and also just a powerful tool in general to connect with people, connection tool. What are some pieces of storytelling that you maybe want to offer people to consider as they're working on their opener if they want to do a story?
Well, what I will say, and you're leading into this, and of course, it is really the buzz, that's going around right now. However, what I do know, it's the most effective way to be able to influence and persuade others, and to be able to elicit emotion. And that's the way that we're able to get buy-in, is through that emotion piece. Stories are sticky, and oftentimes you'll walk away from a presentation, it might be a week later, it might be 2 months later, and that story that Ashley told, it comes into our mind, right? And we start thinking through the story. And then, it's at that point that we're able to connect back to the data, that was wanting to be conveyed, to be communicated. Yeah. So, stories are just, they're super sticky and, super effective. The way that you would deliver it in a presentation often is, that you'll make a statement, and then you will deliver an analogy, or, a story that's connected to, the data or the stats.
Yeah, it's interesting because, and when you say sticky, you mean it sticks with them, not like it's challenging.
No, not challenging at all.
Got it. Sticks with them. Okay. Yeah. And what would you say are, I'm thinking about, so anybody who's taking notes, because I know plenty of you do here on the podcast, your intention, your key message, your 3 supporting arguments, and your opener, which we're talking about data and storytelling as 2 great angles. Is there any other angle that you're thinking about, Janice, that is like, this is also a cool approach to opening?
Nothing's coming to mind right now.
Okay.
No, you've got me stumped.
Yeah. Well, I've seen people open with a question, which sometimes if they haven't built rapport with the audience, sometimes will feel a bit like out of nowhere, but also really great depending on the energy of the person. And, you know, I can't help but ask you about the best speakers you think on the circuit, because, and people who are listening right now, you know, I get that there's speaking as an entrepreneur, speaking as a corporate professional. It's really the same thing. It's just different eyeballs. And I can't help but ask you what you think the best speakers have going for themselves, because those of you listening, I'm sure you haven't heard about what speakers make for a living. It is a highly lucrative job when you are a top speaker. I was just at a workshop, and the girl sitting next to me bills out, I think it was $32,000 per talk, and she does 100 talks a year. So, you know, I'm not at that rate, you know, right now as a speaker, and I really just am continuing to work on the craft, and I really respect it as a creative trait. And I would love to understand from you, for everybody listening, no matter how they're using these tools for speaking and this template you're providing, what do you see in the best speakers that might be beyond the template? Like, what are some of the traits or things you've noticed about the best of the best?
Consistency. That they are out there taking on as many speaking opportunities as they can, and from each time that they're on stage, they are taking away learnings, you know, how they can improve for the next time. But it really is this consistency piece, and you will notice that the best speakers, that they are out and about. You know, consistently, you'll see them on, you know, every platform. If they're visiting your city, they are visiting your city, and then they're out to the suburbs, and, you know, and then, you know, a town or city not very far away. And it is absolutely this consistency piece, and that's how speakers can improve.
Okay.
How often do you speak?
So that was an interesting answer for you to give me, because I try not to do it unless I'm compensated and it's the right timing. Like, I spoke for free for probably 3-4 years before I started getting paid for it. And now I have a huge sensitivity to it because it's a huge energy use, and I love using it, but I don't like giving that from like my heart if it's not being honored, especially as a career coach. I feel totally out of integrity being the free career coach teaching people how to rise up in their career. So I've done way less, but a lot more high impact. So and I've done a lot of emceeing. So I have an MC, and I probably do like 10 paid talks a year, I would say.
And emceeing is actually much more difficult than delivering a presentation.
I find it easier in the sense where I don't have a script. I don't have bullets. Like, I'm just in my being. But it's definitely something that isn't for everybody. I think a lot of speakers are, you know, good at the delivery. Whereas for me, I just kind of ham it up on stage, and I'm like, hello, you know, having a good old time. Okay, so kind of getting into the conclusion, what would you say is a good consideration for somebody to write a good conclusion?
So, you know, especially, you know, you're talking from, you know, professional, organizational perspective, it's usually a call to action. Right. So, you know, what is it that you want your audience to know, think, or do? So that needed to be established in the front end, but firmly communicated in the back end, you know, in the finishing piece of the presentation.
That's great. Okay. And just as we're kind of closing out, like, any like last piece of advice for anybody who really wants to up their game?
And so now, you know, I think a lot of people will probably have a different perspective, you know, on both what you and I have input into this conversation here, to pull up YouTube videos of people giving presentations, watch TED Talks, and now watch them with a much more critical eye. And there's great learnings to be had there.
Okay, and anybody who does that, I will be forever grateful if you DM me on Instagram and let me know where I can improve. Shameless plug, help a sister out. Janice, this has been so awesome. Where can everybody find you and continue learning from you?
So you can find me on my website, and it's simply my name. It's Janice, and I'm an ICE Janice Tomich, TOMICH.com. That's where you can find me.
Woohoo! Thank you so much for being on the show. I appreciate you.
Oh, it's been so much fun. Thank you.
Hey Hey there, it's Ash, and I am just reflecting on Janice Tomich, and I just thought her conversation about how to outline and create a great talk or presentation, whether you've got a large audience, whether you're at work and you've just got a couple of people, was really, really helpful. And what I left our conversation thinking about was the difference between sharing from the mind versus sharing from the heart. And there are so many times where I understand something in my head, but I don't really understand it in my being. And it's in those moments that I realize I need to put a ladder from my head into my heart. And when I really tune into something, it's so much easier to really feel it versus when I'm just speaking from this intellectual knowing. It's kind of like traveling. If you look at a textbook and see a picture of Paris, you know it on a mental level, but you don't know it until you're standing in it experientially and speaking from that level of understanding. And it kind of reminds me of my own speaking career and how I've been building it and the strategies that I've been investing in for me as a business to put my message out there, whatever it may be, whatever I have to say. And what I've learned across the board is if you want to get people to listen to you, then you need to say something that wakes them up and interrupts their thought flow. And where that comes from is often authenticity, emotion, life experience, and human connection. So when I think about how I want to start a TED Talk or a client presentation, if I was in the workforce, I would think about something emotional that everybody can relate to that I've been through without being so vulnerable that I'm kind of walking that line of being too private. There's a line between what's personal and what's private. And I think good speakers are able to tune into something on that line and open up a talk or a presentation where they can share some sort of story that relates to the subject matter at hand that they're about to get into on that line between personal and private and human understanding. And so my recommendation to you, if you're doing more speaking or if you want to win a client over or you have a conference call and there's a bunch of people on there and you really want them to give you their presence, is before you get down to business, think about something in your life that is deeply moving or deeply relevant or shows your humanity or reminds other people of their humanity. And start your conversation, your presentation, your keynote, whatever you're doing off on that topic. And if you have an hour to talk, it doesn't matter if you just give 2 minutes to some sort of story that's relevant and make that tie and why it's relevant and what it has to do with what you want to talk about today as you start to outline what you're going to get into. So in my case, when I think about my life and when I think about what really moves me, what has changed me, I think about my sister having passed away. Like, I know a lot of people can relate to death and loss and grief. I think about getting my heart broken, having a high school sweetheart and breaking up with him. I think about, when I broke up with him, he passed out in the middle of the high school quad. I think about, oh my gosh, being in a toxic relationship, not having a sense of self-worth. I think about losing $5 million, like losing all my money. I think about having $5 million, having experienced wealth, all of these odd experiences that have given me insight into the human experience, because you can look at an experience you've had and think, well, other people can't relate to it. Like maybe some of you can't relate to making $5 million in 2 months, but what you can relate to is wondering, like I did, what it would be like to actually have ease with money, an experience that I got to have and speak from. So what I would recommend is when you look at your life experiences on that line between personal and private, as they relate to something you want to talk about to an audience or to a small group, think about how can I zoom out of this experience? Like my sister dying, maybe people didn't have a sister that died, but they have experienced grief and loss. And that is a touch point where we can meet on. So my recommendation to you today is when you're talking about yourself in your elevator pitch, that's something I talk about a lot in my Job Offer Academy course, or while you're talking about yourself, in your meetings and you've got the floor for a half hour, how can you touch in to everybody's inner human? And how can you speak from the heart and less from the mind just at the beginning of your talk, so that as people start to tune into you, you interrupt their pattern of tuning out and you get them to click in and have an experience with you as a speaker. All right, I hope this was helpful. I know it was all over the place. Hope you're having a beautiful day. Sending you guys light. Take care. Thanks again for tuning into this week's episode of the U-Turn Podcast. We keep really detailed show notes at uturnpodcast.com. So if our guest mentioned a book or a resource that you're interested in, you'll be able to find that there. In the meantime, if you were inspired by this episode, if it made an impact in your life, we would be so grateful if you subscribed and posted a review for us on iTunes. Rumor has it on the street, the more reviews we get, the more subscribes we get, the more we can grow and get our impact out there in the world. In the meantime, I'd love to hear from you at Ashley Stahl on Instagram. I'm so grateful for connecting, and I look forward to next week's episode.